The Canada Revenue Agency files a complaint against its union. And Ontario releases its 3-step plan to tackle a surgery backlog. Later in the show, how is addiction plaguing Muslim families? Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I am Catherine Bullock from Muslim News Canada on Muslim Network TV. Here's what we are covering tonight. The National President of the Union of Taxation Employees is describing a Canada Revenue Agency or CRA complaint against it as, quote, insulting. The union represents more than 35,000 CRA employees. On Friday, the CRA filed a complaint against the union, alleging it was not bargaining in good faith. This past December, the union withdrew from mediation after a return to work order for all CRA employees. According to the union, the CRA refused to withdraw the return to work order during mediation, forcing it to withdraw. The union says without a deal, the CRA will come to a standstill in April, the busiest time of the year. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has announced Monday a new 3-step plan to remove the backlog of surgical procedures. The plan outlines investments in community surgical and diagnostic for-profit and not-for-profit centres to increase their capacity to manage the load. In the first step, new partnerships in Ottawa, Kitchener-Waterloo and Windsor will accommodate up to 14,000 cataract surgeries. In the second step, Ontario surgical and diagnostic centres will be able to conduct colonoscopy and endoscopy procedures. The third step will enable these centres to perform MRI and CT scanning and hip and knee replacement procedures. All these services will be covered by OHIP. 2 Indigenous women have applied to be free on court-ordered conditions after serving 30 years in jail. Records obtained by a media source show the Saskatchewan Crown Attorney opposes a federal review without explaining why. The 2 sisters from Kisiku's First Nation were convicted of second-degree murder in 1994 when a local farmer was murdered by their cousin. The sisters were present at the scene but insist they were not involved in the murder. They were sentenced to life in prison and have served 30 years. Their lawyer and other advocates are trying to get the conviction overturned or downgraded.
We also have to address urgently the issue of climate change and all the other issues related to the preservation of nature.
The World Economic Forum, or the WEF, has launched an initiative to unlock $3 trillion of financing needed each year to tackle climate change and nature loss. The initiative is supported by more than 45 major philanthropic, public and private sector partners. The WEF says the path to 1.5 degrees Celsius warming hangs in the balance due to the high cost of energy and low funding for alternatives. Klaus Schwab, WEF's executive chairman, says private capital, government funds and the philanthropic sector need to work together to reverse the catastrophe. Philanthropic financing for climate mitigation totaled $810 billion in 2021, but just 2% went towards reducing emissions. According to Health Canada, the opioid crisis is having a devastating effect on individuals, families, and communities across Canada. Since 2016, there have been more than 9,000 apparent opioid-related deaths. In 2017, approximately 11 lives were lost each day because of opioid overdoses. Vancouver is apparently the epicenter of this opioid crisis. To talk to us about how it might or might not be affecting Muslims and addiction in general, we are joined by Hira Rashid, a frontline addiction worker all the way from Vancouver. Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much for having me.
You are what you're calling a frontline addictions worker. Do you mind just explaining what that is? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so down here in Vancouver, I've worked with folks facing addictions for a number of years, as well as other communities as well. We did a lot of first-line intervention for addiction, so just making contact with people, trying to get them stabilized, and then where we could, finding resources and references to get them into treatment centers if we possibly were able to do that, and if they were ready to do that.
What does it mean to get someone stabilized?
So a lot of folks who face addictions, unfortunately, especially if it's something called low functioning addictions, you see that they are street entrenched or facing homelessness. They have other parts of their lives that they're struggling with, finances, job, poverty, things like that. So we try to find resources to help stabilize their environment,
Mm.
and then help them get back on their feet.
And does that mean that the first thing you would do is look for shelter?
Yes, and that's a very taboo topic because a lot of places won't offer shelter if you are someone who's actively in addiction. So it's something we try. I wouldn't say we were always successful at, but try was the word.
Oh, that's then what you might call a vicious cycle.
It's definitely a vicious cycle, and the way that we treat addictions and people facing addictions is just horrific.
Are you able to expand on that when you say how we treat people? How are we treating them?
It's just as you would think. It's very stigmatized. It's very taboo, especially in the Muslim community. We don't like to talk about it. And
Mm.
unfortunately, in the Muslim community, addictions is quite rampant. And especially with our youth, it's quite rampant.
And you're seeing that in your work out on the streets amongst Muslims?
Yeah, so we actually, there was a group of us who worked with this organization called Muslim Care Center here, and we started off by just making sandwiches in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is known for where the large population of people facing addictions resides. And we quickly realized that a lot of those folks were Muslim,
Mm.
and they were identifying as Muslim, and they were saying that we don't get any help from our own community, so they were going to other faith-based or non-faith-based resources for support.
We have done a series of interviews over the last year on many, many different topics, and one of them was about the opioid crisis in Canada. It was amongst our least viewed videos. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that out loud in public, but is the Muslim community just not interested in this topic?
I think it's a combination of a lack of knowledge and fear, right?
Mm.
No one wants to really address this big monster, and no one really knows how, or our community may not have the resources on how to deal with it. It's just swept under the rug.
So you are an educator. When you go out to Muslim communities to try to educate them about addiction, what is the first thing you'll tell them?
That addictions is something that's not controllable and it's not a choice, which is a huge misconception still, unfortunately.
And then how are people reacting? What's the most common pushback you get?
It's usually surprise and like, "Oh, what do you mean it's not a choice?" Like, people can just stop, and that's not the truth. People can't just stop. Once you're actively in addictions, it's very, very rare to just stop cold turkey.
Can you explain why?
Absolutely. So when you are addicted to a certain substance, and we're talking about substance addictions like drugs and alcohol, not process addiction, which is different. When you're addicted to a substance, it actually changes the chemistry of your brain, and it tricks your brain into thinking that this drug is more important and essential to your survival than anything else. That includes food, water, sleep, love, shelter, all of those things.
Hmm. In an intervention then, is there some kind of thing that you do to change the brain wiring again?
That takes time. That takes time. I think the first line is to show compassion and empathy to the person, and to come from a non-judgmental and as unbiased space as you can,
Mm.
and show them that there is support there if they want it. Because for a person in addiction, they actually have to take the first step and recognize that they are actively in an addiction.
I see. It has to come from them. They have to want it from themselves within, take the
Ab-
step, and then you can step in to provide support.
Yes, absolutely.
So if not, like if you see someone in addiction and they aren't making that step,
Unfortunately, there's not much that you can do that's going to help, that's going to work long term. When we try and help anyone who's facing addictions from a space where you should get clean for your family, or you should get clean for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or this, that, and the third thing, and it's not something they want for themselves, the
Mm.
chances are, I mean, there is a chance that it'll be great and it'll last, but more so, it's not going to last.
I heard you speak at a conference, a Muslim mental health conference, and you talked about a story, I think it was from you, where someone had died of a heroin addiction, but at the funeral at the mosque, they say it was a heart attack.
Yes, and unfortunately, that is very common, especially in the Muslim community. We have known about folks in our Muslim community who have died from addiction, and of course, the families not wanting to bear the guilt, the shame. People talking will use or utilize a different excuse: heart
Mm.
attack, they fell, unexpected. Like those are the kind of things that you hear.
Can you help me understand a little why the community would feel ashamed or embarrassed and not want to look at this thing head on?
Yeah, I think because addictions is a lot more than what people think it is. It doesn't just affect one individual, it affects an entire family, an entire community. And it is very difficult to work with someone who is actively in addiction and who doesn't want the help to get out. And it's very draining. So, with one, having lack of resources in our communities, and two, not wanting to talk about it because it's so taboo and so stigmatized, it's just caused this ignorance around what addictions really is. And that unfortunately is harming our Muslim families all across Canada and all across the world, actually.
And do you think that stems from the earlier statement that you made that people think it's just a choice? And so they're choosing something that, the Quran says don't do, and therefore you can look down on them?
Absolutely. And that's what we hear a lot from Muslim folks who are actively in addiction is anytime that they have sought help from a faith-based resource, they've been told, you're participating in haram, you're participating in sin, and that you are either not welcome to come to the mosque or come to this place until you get clean, or we don't know how to help you. You're making a choice for yourself, right? And unfortunately, like I said, active addiction is not a choice.
What would it look like then in an ideal world? An imam would be at the center and a person with addiction would come and say, help me. And the imam would say,
In a perfect world, the imam would say, I have these resources for you that are faith-based. I have these addictions counselors in the community. I have, here's people who, like you, have successfully come out of addiction that are in our community that can guide you. Here's a Muslim-based Alcoholics Anonymous group or a Muslim-based, Islamic-based, Narcotics Anonymous group. There's a lot of things. Like I wouldn't put everything on the imam, but if we have the imam ready with resources, I think that could make a big difference.
So then that sounds like a lot of work. Is there a Muslim addiction support group? Is there a Muslim like Alcoholics Anonymous? Do they even exist?
Absolutely, there is. There's actually quite a few across Canada. And again, with people who face addictions, talking about religion can be a little bit touchy. So a lot of these groups may not start off as faith-based, or your journey may not start off as faith-based, but because Alcoholics Anonymous was created on Christianity basis, it's easily malleable to put in more Islamic values in there, but helping someone go down the right path to becoming clean and reconnecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is easily done. And there's already groups that do it.
So let's say somebody's watching and they want to reach out. How will they find these resources?
You can go online. There are also actually apps that will tell you that there are certain groups around your area that will cater to either alcohol or narcotics or even other addictions as well. And it'll tell you what faith-based they are, or if they're not faith-based, if it's just for women. There's lots of information, and you can actually get all of the information on these online resources and apps.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for coming and for all the work you do, all the frontline work you do. We thank you so much, and
thank you for having me.
Sharing today. Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.